it's pretty explicit what the Chinese what they say they're going to do with these governors. And to go back to Chris's question about that
think tank,
yeah, what did they find when they were looking at U.S. governors?
Thank you for bringing me back on track. So this is a Chinese think tank that I believe in 2019 published a report of every American governor and whether they were friendly towards China, hostile, or neutral. And they used public statements to answer this. It's not exactly the most robust methodology, so I don't think we can take it as any ironclad finding about the governors, but they went through and they ranked them. And the report starts with the assumption that this is important, that targeting influence efforts to state leaders is a critical part of China's campaign vis-a-vis the United States, and then goes on to say, here are players who are activated or not activated on China's manipulations of the trade environment, on China's human rights abuses, on China's propaganda. And then it colors in the United States as to friendly or unfriendly on that front.
Well, I just think it's so interesting that, China is like specifically taking the time and putting the resources into studying local U.S. officials. That's not something the U.S. is doing to China. Like, it just shows a completely different focus of the government.
Yeah, this is probably all, I imagine, done through the United Front Work Department, which is like that arm of the Communist Party that's specifically designed to coordinate efforts at influence operations inside China and worldwide, right? So it's all this like very like coordinated, but officially part of the central, the central Communist Party.
Exactly. One of the major nodes that's used in the U.S. but internationally is the China People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, or the CPA-FFC, which is a United Front affiliate. And it's explicitly charged, it's the subordinate entity of United Front Work that's specifically charged with fostering relationships with subnational players all across the world.
So do they function as an official government organization, or are they kind of like, if you say it's the Association for Friendship, are they functioning as some kind of like nonprofit friendship association kind of thing?
So they're a government organization, but they set up or they're affiliated with entities that are registered abroad as nonprofit type things. But yes, sorry. Original question, they do not declare themselves necessarily formally to be a government entity. They do.
And so they would be like a registered foreign agent.
Yes. And I think they're recognized as this, at least now. I don't want to, perjure myself or lie, but if they have a history of obscuring the ties, it's now like very much acknowledged or clear that they're a government player.
But if you're, say, like the governor of West Virginia or something, or the governor of Idaho or Montana, and there's an organization that's called the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, and they want to have an event with you, like that sounds pretty...
It's about friendship, Shelley.
Yeah, it sounds pretty innocuous, right?
Exactly. And if they want to invite you on a trade delegation to China, that sounds fantastic. Or vice versa, if they want to host the trade delegation. And then, of course, you get layers down as well, because CPA-FFC is also affiliated with or supports these U.S.-registered nonprofits that have similar names, like the about U.S.-China exchange or about U.S.-China friendship. And those aren't explicitly CPA-FFC. Those are definitely not explicitly government tied. It would be that much more difficult for your average state, local level leader to see those and realize what they were.
But it basically means U.S. politicians are getting, free trips to China.
Yeah. Well, part of that is ensuring exchanges, so trips to China, and then on the part of Chinese officials or leaders to the U.S. And on those trips, of course, the U.S. local level leaders they meet not only government players, but also leadership of state-owned entities that might be seeking to invest in or acquire resources from the state. Also not state-owned, but state-guided players, probably media entities as well in the process. The whole network of China's influence campaign it becomes part of those visits.
Yeah, I really get a sense of how you say the Communist Party is taking advantage of sort of the fractured system of U.S. politics. Like state governments are, to a degree, independent from the federal government, and they can, on their own, make economic decisions. They don't need to get federal approval for everything. But in the context of a hostile authoritarian government that has very publicly said exactly what they're doing, it seems amazing to me that, like, you know, this can happen so easily and for so long.
Absolutely. And I mean, you kind of, on the one hand, it should not necessarily be up to the state, local level leaders to have figured this out and taken concrete action. Like, this seems to be the kind of thing that in an ideal world, the federal government realized decades ago, and then taking the steps to equip local level leaders to recognize and act on. But clearly that hasn't happened. So now, we're at the point where it has to fall to state, local level leaders to figure it out.
Well, that was one of the questions I had. Does the federal government realize what's going on?
There's been some amount of awareness and growing awareness over the past 2 to 3 years. So under the last administration, the CPAFFC, which we just spoke about, had set up in, I think, 2015, a U.S.-China Governors Forum, which was an annual event in which U.S. governors and then provincial level leaders in China met, and this was supposed to be an avenue for influence. So CPAFFC had set this up. They also have another forum for state legislators that does a similar thing. The last administration terminated the agreement that allowed the U.S.-China Governors Forum to take place, and did so amid a number of public statements regarding Chinese malign influence in the U.S., including at the local level. So there was definitely an awareness that indicated. I think that awareness has continued, but there hasn't. That is a very tactical response, right? It hits at one very specific manifestation of China's campaign, but not at the larger whole. And that action hasn't been built upon in any more strategic way.
I mean, yeah, your report mentions this China U.S. Governors forum, and I hadn't realized that this was even a thing. But it seems like they had put a lot of effort into this.
Oh, yes. And it was the product of national government level effort that led to this being formed. A ton of Chinese media would cover it, pretty high level announcements and presence at it. And it seems to have led to a host of economic agreements, including economic agreements in fields that since have seen China hollow out American industry, like, for example, the solar industry. And similar level effort has been put at other elements of, subnational ties between China and the U.S., like the State Legislators Forum, but also like the sister city relationship.
Well, for the Governors Forum, didn't Xi Jinping speak?
Yes. When he visited the U.S., on the trip where he lands in Seattle first before going to visit Washington, which really indicates priorities, he attended the Governors Forum and spoke at it.
And that's 2015, right?
That visit is 2015, yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned this has been going on for a while, though. For how long has the Chinese Communist Party's subnational influence operations in the U.S. been going on? Is it like 2 decades old, like 7 decades old? I mean, what are we looking at?
That's a great question. So in terms of what we looked at in our research, we found things from the early 2000s, but we didn't really look beyond that. However, it's so in line with China's broader strategic approach, and a broader strategic approach that's been underway for well beyond 2 decades, that I would expect that to one level or another, this is a well beyond 2 decades long campaign.